So Wrathion has been absent from the game since Mists of Pandaria, or Warlords of Draenor if you count his brief cameo when you complete the Legendary Ring questline and his unseen appearance in Admiral Taylor's garrison, but the Black Prince is never seen. His motives were and still are unknown, and we still haven't seen him and are just now hearing from him in 8.2.5. Today I'm going to go over the assortment of pages he's left for you to find, because it explains where he's kind of been in the time between the Veiled Stair and the present, and instead of just, beating around the bush, we're just going to get right into it. But first, I should say, I'm not going to read the entirety of his journal. I did that in a previous recording, and it came out to roughly 20 minutes of audio, and that is too much. That's too much. Instead, I'm going to put it on the screen, pause, so you can pause and read, then go over the things I want to touch upon. Okay? Okay, let's start. The first page you pick up is from left and right at the Veiled Stair. There's your pause. You can pause and read now. Okay. From the first page, we learn that Wrathion is scouring the world for knowledge of the old gods. His first stop is in Eldrith Thalas, or as we know it, Diremaul, which was home to the Shendralar, who were actually a faction of demon-sucking highborn that you could get exalted with in the days of WoW yore, but as Wrathion puts it, are no longer around, and that's due to the Horde's early raids on Diremaul, considering that in the canon lore, the Horde were the ones who cleared Diremaul the first go-around, according to the Chronicle. And it might have also come to your attention that the first page we get is actually page 7 of Wrathion's journal, meaning that there have been previous entries, possibly other pages, that predate Wrathion's visit to Diremaul. Maybe these other pages involve his trip to alternate Draenor and what he could have been doing there, or what he learned, or something like that, but regardless, we only really learn Wrathion's intentions and the fate of a faction that hasn't really been relevant in a long, long time. But then we get to part 2 of page 7. There's your pause, you can go ahead and, do whatever. Wrathion talks about the war. More specifically, the wars waged between the Alliance and the Horde, and the amount of devastation it leaves behind. To quote the page, "But such is the nature of warfare, is it not? Seldom does it accomplish the intentions of its architects, and never without leaving immeasurable devastation in its wake, especially when the Horde and the Alliance are the forces in conflict. Can one ultimately say that victory is worth the price that must be paid to achieve it? Perhaps it is in some cases, but the verdict is not as easily reached as I once thought." Now, back in Mists of Pandaria, Wrathion's goal was to unite the factions against the Burning Legion and protect Azeroth. He was going to do this by aiding adventurers of both the Alliance and the Horde, but having one of the factions take out their rival and absorb them into their fold, essentially uniting the world's most dominant powers. As you might be aware, that was not the case. The war ended with the Horde defeat, a Darkspear rebellion, yet the Alliance did not absorb them. They allowed the Horde to live on as a separate entity. Wrathion was upset and revealed his intentions of backing the Alliance once Garrosh threw away victory.
You were there! Is it true, then? What happened in Orgrimmar? That fool king. I did everything in my power. The whole world was his. He needed only seize it. Oh, sure, another year of fighting, enormous casualties trying to take Thunder Bluff, but the rest of the Horde would have caved eventually. Tong! Drink! Now!
But here, in his journal, he admits that he might have been wrong to bring the factions together under one banner, which, if you believed Wrathion might have made Sylvanas war chief like I once did, it kind of, blows that idea up. If you think about it, if he doesn't want the factions to kill one another, right, anymore and unite, why would he be the one to put Sylvanas in charge? I should also say that if the Black Prince isn't so sure about the factions uniting, maybe you shouldn't be so sure either. On to the next entry, which we acquire from an agent outside of Blackrock Mountain. There's your pause. There's page 2. Go ahead and read it. This entry shows that both the Shadowpen and the Lore Walkers are still active on Pandaria, both having some pieces to the great old god puzzle, and by how Wrathion words his sentences, it sounds like he's been on Pandaria for a lot longer than just the one expansion we've seen him in. For example, when he writes, "For all the time I have spent in Pandaria, only recently did I make acquaintance with the Lore Walkers. This entire time, We've been asking where he's been, but maybe when he isn't digging for clues about old gods, he's just been right where we left him on the Veiled Stair. There's really not much besides that revelation, plus the fact we get a tiny update on what's happening in southern Azeroth. Also, we time skipped, if you notice, from entry 7 to entry 16, then I'm going to use this as a segue. We time skip again to page 25, which reads, there's your pause. Then on the following page, another pause. These pauses are getting awkward for me. I'm sorry if you feel the same. To sum up this entry, Wrathion has learned of the Titans and the Forge of Origination, but not how it's supposed to be used. Quick recap for you, if you don't know what the Forge of Origination is. The Forge of Origination is located in Oldham and is able to completely wipe out the planet of all life on Azeroth, old gods included. And it kind of makes you think, if Wrathion learns of how to use the Forge and what it does, would he use it? Honestly, it's a question for another time, but we have more things to talk about here. He then took his search to the Vault of Archivon, the raid we did in Wrath of the Lich King, only to find that the Watchers that remain have a strong distrust of visitors because of us, the players. It's like everywhere we go, we just make enemies. Honestly, it really makes you think, are we the baddies? Wrathion also briefly mentions that the Aspects still do not trust him and probably never will due to history, which is something that was briefly touched upon when the mention of the Dragon Isles came up in conversation with one of his agents. And finally, page number 58, a huge time skip in the timeline. Go ahead and give page 1 and page 2 a look-see. I'll wait. You done? Okay, good. In his last entry, Wrathion writes that he's going to try and locate someone that has the understanding of the world and its events. Regardless of if he meant it to be or not, his search carries him to Karazhan, home of the Last Guardian. Well, technically, not really a home anymore since he's, whatever. Medivh's library, and the knowledge it holds, is said by Wrathion to dwarf the libraries of Dalaran, the Vault of Archivon, Dire Maul, and probably every other place the Black Prince has visited. It's no wonder that Khadgar always returns to his master's tower when he requires knowledge, which he's done multiple times in the past. As for Wrathion, he found and created a cure, a small vial able to cleanse old god corruption and whispers. The amount of stuff one can do with that thing it's nuts. We essentially become immune to the temptations of old gods, and even if someone, maybe us or the Black Dragons or the Void Elves or something like that, we could give them this cure and basically become unstoppable. Now, I could go on and on about what we briefly learned from Wrathion's text, but this is going to be a monster of a video, at least in terms of my other ones. So let's wrap it up and save some stuff for another time. Wrathion's final entry. I will read this one because pausing is tiring. A new legacy, in the end. Perhaps that is what I am truly after. A way to make amends for my father's failings, as well as my own. A legacy worthy of the Black Dragonflight's original sacred charge. The defense of Azeroth. The end of the old gods. I do hope these pages have proven to be of use to you. I would hate to think my agents wasted their time delivering them to you as instructed. Rest assured that, when the time is right, you will have my aid in the fight against N'Zoth, in the true battle for Azeroth. Oh, and one last request. Burn this journal. It is time my actions speak for me. Thanks for watching.